Good morning, everybody. Hope you all are doing well today. It's realizing it's 1 o'clock, so I can't really say good morning anymore. Um, First and foremost, I want to get started in mentioning for a couple things for this particular week. You have two forum posts that I want you to pay attention to. So one is going to be the About You, which I've already had a number of people already starting to respond on that, which is amazing, and I'm glad you have. I'm going to try to respond to everybody as soon as possible, so I'll make sure I hear everybody else. So, please make sure that you're keeping on as you learn. I really appreciate that, like I said, you are participating, and keep it up. I will also mention that there is the next forum, which I'm kind of catering to, especially these first few weeks of class, especially when we're dealing with David Meerman Scott, which I hope that you have gotten started to read some of this material. What we're going to be looking over in this case is we have got a set number of rules that we know, and that what we're kind of exploring within the new rules that were mentioned within the book. So like I said, it is on As You Learn, so make sure that you're reading, and if you have any questions, this is what the forum's for. So I hope you take the opportunity to look into some of the themes that we talk about within this chapter that I'm going to be talking about today, as well as just kind of continuously throughout the semester as we're dealing with this particular book. So I kind of want to keep Thursdays kind of an open forum. So on Thursdays, actually approach some topics that you find interesting, questions that you have. If I need to cover over anything else that I've either may have missed or would be genuinely helpful that you may not understand. So these are the times to bring it up. So that's kind of what I want to do for Thursdays. So if you're able to do that, if you've got the energy to put that up online, please do so. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't feel bad. This is what it's all here for, and I want to be able to help as much as I can. There's also the media log. Now, I believe I've got the date for September 5th by midnight, and I will mention if you want to go ahead and start working on that, be my guest. The instructions are pretty clear, and it does not necessarily have to reflect the average consumable media that you normally do. I hope it does. However, some of y'all have expressed that you're going somewhere, whether it's like conference travel or, a vacation or something. If that's the case, then that's what's going to happen. I mean, none of this is going to exist in a vacuum. But what I would recommend is find 4 interrupted days where you would say that your media consumption is going to be pretty regular for how you would normally do things. And be honest, I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to pass any judgment whatsoever about what you watch or how much you watch of it, or I won't go in there and say, oh, have you been reading your book? No, none of that. I want to make sure that it is accurate and honest as possible. And so when you're going through this, I will mention that I want you to be somewhat specific, but it doesn't necessarily have to be super specific. And what I mean by that is, if you're watching a television show, let me know what television show that is and for how long. I don't need to know that I texted this person over the course of 3 hours, like this specific person. You can just say, texted for 3 hours. That can be a portion of using that. Or I was on Instagram for 2 hours. You don't have to tell me who you visited. You just need to tell me that you were on it. And that will help me kind of assess a little bit what we're dealing with here. So, again, there needs to be that area of specificity, but it doesn't have to be so much that you have to record so many specific things. And also, don't do any of this while you're driving, okay? So if some have been tempted to say, well, I saw a billboard while I was driving. I'm like, don't reference that. It misses a little bit of the point of the assignment when we get into how we measure some of this data. So what I recommend is, again, just looking at the outlets that you're viewing. That's the kind of specificity that I want. And again, if there's shows within it That's, again, what we're looking for here. So there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do it, but I just want to kind of make sure that you're clear on that. And if you have any questions, let me know. Again, this is what the forum is there for, especially for the first week, so we can bring that up, and I can answer those questions on Thursday. So let's dive a little bit into David Meerman Scott. So New Rules of Marketing and PR. So I like this conversation, especially because we're talking about what we've been doing for, decades. And the good thing about, and I say good thing because I always am a person that likes to learn. And so as we progress more and more and dive more and more into new technology, media changes with us. So, in 1980, a prophetic scholar named Gerbner talked about how the television was the most revolutionary piece of technology. It does something that no other piece of technology can do, or no medium can do. And think about how much that's changed, how much we're dealing with things in terms of social media and the internet, and how we communicate through streaming now. And there's so much there in terms of understanding how we communicate through computer-mediated communication in general. And so the rules of it change. And this is one of the things that David Meerman Scott, I always tempted to call him DMS. This is one of the things that David Meerman Scott references constantly throughout this, is the old media design is always go with what we know. And I'm going to be teaching you some of those things of what we know, because they're not gone. So television isn't completely gone, although streaming services certainly have moved things around. But there are reasons why major celebrities always get the most tweeted content, to where it has broken the internet a couple times. And so, again, the old media design is to go what we know. We know what impressions are. We know what gross rating points are, which are also known as GERPs, which you'll find out when you're reading through Media Flight Plan. We know what a rating system is for, like Nielsen ratings in that case. And so we get into what did David Meerman Scott mean when he was referring to the authenticity of advertising on the web. So we got to dive into that a little bit. First, we talk about cost. What do we think about when we buy advertising? We think about what is it that we usually try to purchase. And one of the few things that we try to purchase is who's going to be watching it the most. So this is like a core element of what we've known in media planning forever, which is how many eyes are going to be looking at this. So these are your impressions in terms of how many people are going to view this once, the reach that's associated, and then again the ratings that come along with it. And so with that, we've always kind of used the Super Bowl, for instance, as this holy grail of advertising. And it's easy to see why, because it's the most viewed one-time event of television. And I mean, this is why we talk about these commercials being so good, because they have to be. Because we're spending, $5 million for a 30-second spot, and that's a lot of money to spend for only 30 seconds. And I'm going to show you a video, which I thought was really cool. Not on this one, but on the As You Learn. It said the most effective way in terms of how we know the media landscape today. Best way to advertise on the Super Bowl is don't. Talking about using your $5 million towards geo-targeted ads on YouTube would probably be more preferable than ever doing this online. And we might sit there and go, why is that? Why is it that we view it that way? Because again, we've done this forever. There was the case study of a person who mortgaged his house to get an ad on the Super Bowl, and his brand went up 300%. So obviously it works, right? But when we get into about major purchasing decisions, for instance, so if anybody that's bought a car or something major in the past few months there, we might sit there and say, how did you find out about it? Well, nowadays, I think in a lot of cases, I know when I recently, or when I say recently, it's 2 years ago, bought a car, I was looking for personal recommendations. So people that live in Boone, trust people that work in this case in Boone, and I also talked to people who own this specific car. I reached out online, and it was kind of cool how that worked and how I was able to access some of that information. This is where media planning comes in for what we know to be new, because again, it used to be the most eyes to see a certain event. Well, a lot of that's changing now, in that some of the best ways to do it is find the eyes that are going to be most interested. So you may not get a huge population of people that are going to view it, but the small one are going to be very invested. So I hope you're taking that journey with me as I'm trying to describe it. The smaller audience might be more prevalent because they're watching it more. They're paying attention to it more. They're more interested in it. We all have these like subgroups. So like if you ever go on social media on Facebook, I belong to several of these groups that they're very specific in terms of one particular thing that they like. So if it's a television show, it's this particular television show. And they reference that one specifically, and they enjoyed that one specifically. And the fans are rabid, and they really pull themselves in to be a part of it. So, when I buy a car, for instance, I use social media, for instance, and find places that are up to date in their social media. When we were moving, give you a small anecdote about this. When we were moving, we wouldn't go to a place unless they gave us confirmation via email about the service. There was a moving company, I won't mention who it is, but there's a moving company around here that was just kind of like, we'll pencil you in. And I was like, buddy, we've only got a day window to move, so I don't trust this confirmation via phone and just saying my word is going to do that. I want something written. And that's what it's come down to in this case. But how did I find out about it? Reviews online. I ended up being a coworker that really liked it, and so we used this particular moving service that was real strong in terms of correspondence. Which, if you want to know who it is, just message me. I'll be more than happy to tell you. And other things could be, how did you find Appalachian State? How did you find this institution in particular, especially when it comes to the online program? Because as I'm seeing through the forums, most of y'all ain't in Boone, so it's a little bit different in this case. So let's go into some of the old rules in advertising and what. So I'm switching gears a little bit. What does the David Meerman Scott say? One thing we can do is power big journalists. It's one thing to promote our brand on a commercial. It's another thing for a journalist to be able to come in and preach this information, because they're supposed to be the unbiased ones. And it was also, if you've got the most money, the most people will see it, therefore you're going to have the most effective ad campaign. So it's not, and it's still not inherently wrong that someone does that. So like if a journalist were to talk about your brand and explain it, and tell about, like, say your brand is doing some good corporate social responsibility within your community, those still help. And if you've got a lot of money, yeah, that still helps. But it's not necessarily that we're talking about the first new lesson of media planning. And again, I'm jumping a little off ship here when it comes to what we've known for forever within media planning. So some of y'all may know this because you work in social media, but it leads to our first big lesson of new rules within media planning. Scheduling, budgeting, media share vehicles are entirely up to the client's needs. That hasn't changed. Where you place them is, obviously going to be very, very different from where you're going to do. But scheduling is extremely important, and knowing what is going to be the best time to be able to promote this is a big deal. So I run the National Student Advertising competition, and I can say this now because we're done with the campaign, but we did ocean spray. And one of the things that we're talking about is, when is harvest season? And when do people buy it the most? And so ocean spray, in this case, in case that you don't know anything about it, it's primarily a cranberry juice company. So we're like, okay, when are cranberries in harvest? And we found out that July is when the harvest really starts to go. Okay, we're like, cool. When do people buy ocean spray or cranberry juice? Well, think about it. It's during the holidays. So Thanksgiving and during the holiday season in December is typically when people buy. I mean, you think of, like, when's the last time you bought, cranberry sauce? Other than, like, Thanksgiving, or, you know, if you had a Christmas dinner or something like that. Maybe it's part of your normal routine. It isn't mine. But that's the kind of thing we talk about when we're dealing with this. And so this would differ quite dramatically than the year after that we did Wiener Schnitzel. So if you've never heard of Wiener Schnitzel, that's okay. It's based out of, I think, New Mexico. If I'm wrong on that, it's in that southwest region. But that was a different thing. And one of the things that we talked about was we actually chose the fall again, but for a different reason. We said, well, what about Oktoberfest? You know, we're dealing with Wiener Schnitzel, and that's hot dogs. Now, if you've ever actually had Wiener Schnitzel, it is completely different from what the brand Wiener Schnitzel is. So Wiener Schnitzel is hot dogs. An actual Wiener Schnitzel is fried, pounded out pork, which is delicious, by the way. But again, it's kind of big in Eastern Europe and some parts in Germany and Austria. Mainly Austria is real big into it. So how this can apply to you, I am always saying that employers, we can talk about how we are talking about your interactive online portfolio. And what I mean by that is most times that I really don't want to put too much emphasis on your grades per se. I mean, obviously, I know it's going to be important to you what your grades are, but it's more important to me what you're able to show to your employers. So, for example, you know, I've had students that have made B's in this class but gave an impressive interactive online portfolio. They won't look twice at your grade. And for the record, the final project for this particular student was outstanding. It was just that they did not participate in most everything. So their grades suffered, but they still had really impressive work. And because of that, they had really good job prospects for that. So how do you build your brand in particular is going to matter. So when we're looking at this final project, for instance, you know, make sure that looks strong as your brand. And it also goes a lot into what David Meerman Scott talks about, and what your online brand looks like, and what is your persona. Because I joke around and say your social media is essentially its own PR. So what does your Instagram look like? What does your Pinterest look like? What does your Twitter look like? What does your LinkedIn look like? Those things matter in terms of what people are looking at. And it gets into one of David Meerman Scott's main points is you are what you publish on the internet. So if you publish a lot of great information, strong information, that's what you are. You are a very strong brand. And you basically say if you're posting crap, that's what you are. And if you're posting nothing, that's what you are. So, you know, building that brand makes a big area, makes a lot of sense in terms of how you promote yourself. So you look at people who do cross platform, it's called trans-platform, in terms of how you build your brand. I like the way one of my favorite vloggers, his name is Steve Dangle, he does a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs videos, and this is how good he is. I don't watch the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's an NHL team. I don't watch them, but I'm so enthralled by the way he does things that I end up watching and almost kind of root for the Toronto Maple Leafs at times. And even though, you know, I'm a Pittsburgh fan and I also like the Sabres, I shouldn't like the Maple Leafs, but I do because I feel so attached to his brand. And not only does he do it really well on YouTube, he also puts things on Twitter, all throughout social media, and I follow him all throughout. And so I get this experience with Steve in anything that he posts. And don't get me wrong, paying to play still works, but in his particular case, he started up, Steve Dangle's case, he started up, you know, drinking heavily and reviewing Toronto Maple Leafs games in his room. And now he's invited on TSN, which is like the ESPN of Canada, and Sportsnet. You know, he's invited to all these games. You know, he started himself from scratch. And there might be brands that work for a national market. Budweiser Anheuser-Busch in general, obviously, you are going to have a lot of money to spend with. I mean, they put out several Super Bowl commercials a year. And so it makes sense of them paying to play. They're a national recognized brand. We expect them to be in the Super Bowl in this case. But are you getting the best return on investment? The problem that we have nowadays is media clutter, for instance. So when we post an advertisement, we'll have a bunch of tweets about us. Our attention on Google ads will spike. But then where is it in 5 days? We might have some journalists that rank the top advertisements, and that's great, if we have that. But is it going to increase in, again, sales for our business? And then the answer is no. And we're wasting a lot of money. So really think about that concept too. How good is a mass audience nowadays? So we'll talk more as we go along through the semester about what are called index numbers in terms of a lot of people retaining information as they're going along with it. And a lot of this comes into one-way communication. So I'm going to dive into a little bit of mass communication theory here to talk about this. What we've always known as communication, especially when it comes to mass communication, is this idea of there is this big entity, your news outlets, which I don't call it mass media. I hate, I call it mass media, but I don't say the media. I hate that. You're dealing with a mass communication network putting information to a group of people. This is what we used to call magic bullet theory, which, quite the name, I understand. But what it was essentially saying is here is this omnipresent media corporation injecting, they also called it hypodermic needle model, injecting their ideals into a group of people. And strangely enough, this theory is making a comeback. But we knew this as a very linear model of communication, aka this information would go directly to the audience, but they wouldn't respond back. So does this stuff apply anymore? I think obviously to a certain degree, because the question can always be, do major media outlets influence us, or do we influence major media outlets? And the answer is yes, we do both. And it goes in both ways. It's very cyclical in this case because we can interact with it now. So if something goes wrong, or we really like something, we can tweet about it, and those companies can see it and respond, and they should. They should absolutely respond. And we deal with how communication has evolved over the year with, you may have seen the interactive model or transactional model of where it's not a feedback loop anymore, it's not a linear mode anymore, it's two separate entities, kind of like a Venn diagram, communicator A and communicator B, and there's this shared area of interest that ultimately defines what we know about communication. So what does all this mean is how we've changed. Because old rules of marketing, we would sit there and say, why is it not necessarily needed to appeal to the masses? In what ways can we advertise without interrupting? That's a big one. And Facebook right now is really guilty of it in terms of I'm watching a video and then it's all of a sudden, the ad is going to start in 3, 2. That really annoys me. But that is, again, how we improve things on the media landscape. And I want y'all to pay close attention to this, is because we're going to be talking about a lot of important stuff in terms of advertising on TV, radio, online newspapers. But it's also important to remember, how can we pitch an idea without feeling like an advertisement? Because this is part of the problem when we're dealing with newer generations of people who are consuming media at a very alarming rate in this case. So what are we selling, if not products? I like this one that David Meerman Scott said. What are we selling if not products? And we're selling ourselves. They use a really cool instance with a dentist that was talking about, instead of, here's, my dental practice, this is what we do. She wrote, is a Boston-based dentist, and she mentioned something about I'll go into this much more later, but sex and oral care. And it was pretty cool about how that was done. And she wrote an online book about it. It was amazing how many people viewed it and talked about it. And then that's kind of the point. That was her online presence versus every single one of them was, pitching on the Yellow Pages. Which, I mean, I don't know about the rest of y'all. In many ways, the Yellow Pages acts as a doorstop for my door at home. And it goes right into the recycle. Now, I'm not saying, because we've had a lot of talk about this, where some people are saying, look, we still live in Western North Carolina, so people still use the Yellow Pages. And that goes to another point of, again, some of these aren't outdated, and depending on the region, you can have different ways of approaching media. But it is important to remember that, we are using social media more and more and more, so it helps to have that presence. When my wife and I went to Switzerland, and it was really cool, by the way. So when we went to Switzerland for a conference, we wanted to check out a brewery out there. We found out it was closed. We wouldn't have found out if we used GPS from Google, we used the Facebook address that they had, and, they had really good pictures and stuff, so I thought this was going to be an amazing experience to go to a brewery in Switzerland. Well, it turns out they were closed. The also good thing was that I was like, look, I'm in Lugano, Switzerland. I am probably never going to be back here again, although I'm try to go back, but it's not a very big town, and I think after like 4 or 5 days, you kind of see most of it. But it was one of those things that they responded to me quickly. And I was like, if y'all ever open up and I'm back, I'm going. Not only because of the way your Facebook runs, but also how responsive y'all were. And that was the kind of communication that worked so well in terms of me and whoever it is that's trying to advertise. So they were selling themselves, and they were selling a business, but it really caught my eye more that it was a personal thing. I'll give you one more example. So one of my interests, I like playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's actually a real big hobby of mine. And I like to collect really nice dice sets. And sure enough, there's a brand I like, but one of the reasons I like it so much is because I went to college with one of the people that works there in Banner Elk. And oddly enough, we didn't talk to each other that much in college. But it just so happens that years later we reconnected on Facebook, and we have a mutual interest within these Dungeons and Dragons community, and we just kind of kept talking to each other. And I'm like, first we need to meet up, because this is crazy that we went to the same 800-person school in Banner Elk, North Carolina, and we're interested in the same stuff. So again, I like this brand a lot more because of this personal aspect that goes into it. I'm invested, even though there's not a huge market for not only people that play Dungeons and Dragons, although that's increasing, but also the people who want to pay a pretty significant amount for a dice set. These things cost usually like $10. But I'm willing to pay, I wouldn't say like super significantly more. I'm not paying, $300-400 for them, but I am paying more than $50 for a set. And there's a very specific demographic, but they know their demographic quite well. They know me personally by name every time I go over there, because I visit so much every time I go to these conferences. I will most likely have them if you check my Twitter when I go to Seattle, so that will be something. I went off track a little bit. I apologize. And part of this also gets into good PR, selling this to journalists. This is how it used to be, and I know because I've worked in journalism before, and we would get press releases all the time that they would say, okay, this is something that's happening that y'all should know about, whether it be a crisis situation, which was less likely, or more likely, it's like, hey, we've got this new product coming out, or we're doing this new service, or we're participating in fundraising. We would like you to talk about this. And for the most part, as a journalist, I would look at them like an employer looks at resumes regrettably. It's just like, nope, 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 nope. Oh, okay, I find this one particularly interesting. And we still do that to a degree. It's still nice to have journalists on our side. But now we can skip journalists if we want to. We can post on our social media. We're going to talk about that on Chapter 2 here soon, but it is important not only to still be in good contact with those media folks, but we don't need them as much, but especially when it comes into crises, they're going to be all over whatever it is that's happening in this case. So having good media relations still plays a big, big key in this case. But here's the thing. When's the last time you read a press release? You are far more likely to see a new product come out on Facebook. I mean, this is why I pay attention to, like, Oreo, for instance, because they'll always come out with new stuff. Or who does social media really well are craft breweries. Not only in terms of their humanitarian efforts, but also because they're always posting these really cool new beers that are coming out. And that works way better than a press release because there's visual information attached. They don't have to write it in AP style. They can just post whatever they want about it. And for the most part, when you're doing press release, it only really makes sense to a journalist anyway. So you got to know your audience. It's like try explaining Snapchat to your grandmother. You know, it's something that while they may understand it just fine, it may be not within their target demographic. So these are all things to think about. So I want y'all to really take this into consideration as this week's lecture. And the main reason I bring it up is just to understand what we're dealing with here in terms of the first chapter of old rules. So we're going to get into new rules here soon. And I've already talked about some of them kind of just involuntarily because I can't help myself, but when I talk about old media, I have to talk about the new, like, immediately after. But in this case, I'm going to be talking about that in Chapter 2 here soon. So keep an eye out. Again, I'm also going to put the video of why you shouldn't advertise in the Super Bowl. So that'll be coming up. Make sure that any interesting topic that you want to talk about, put it in the forums. Other than that, that's all from me today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will be talking to you soon.